December 25th, 2024. Emily Thompson was spending her third consecutive Christmas alone in her Chicago apartment, having declined invitations from friends who pitted the 45-year-old woman who had no family to celebrate with. At 9:47 p.m., just as Emily was settling in to watch old Christmas movies and pretend the holiday didn't remind her of everything missing from her life, someone knocked on her door. Emily wasn't expecting anyone. She had no family. Her mother had died of cancer 10 years earlier, and her father had abandoned them when Emily was 5 years old, leaving behind no forwarding address and no explanation for his disappearance. She had grown up as an only child with a single mother who refused to talk about the past, creating a family history full of gaps that Emily had learned to live with but never stopped wondering about. But the man standing in her doorway on Christmas night would shatter every assumption Emily had made about her family, her father's disappearance, and the reason she had spent 40 years believing she was alone in the world. The stranger was elderly, maybe 75 years old, with kind eyes and weathered hands that shook slightly as he held a manila envelope thick with documents and photographs. His voice was gentle but urgent when he spoke the words that would change Emily's life forever. "Emily Thompson, my name is Frank Rodriguez, and I've been searching for you for 20 years. I have information about your father that your mother never told you, and I have a family who've been looking for you since the day you disappeared from their lives." What Emily didn't know was that Frank Rodriguez held the key to a 40-year-old mystery that would reveal her father hadn't abandoned his family. He had been taken from them by circumstances beyond his control. And the family who had been searching for Emily all these years was larger, more loving, and more desperate to find her than she could have ever imagined. The knock at Emily's door wasn't just an unexpected Christmas visit. It was the answer to questions she had stopped believing would ever be answered. Emily Thompson had grown up with a mother who treated the past like a forbidden subject. Margaret Thompson would deflect any questions about Emily's father with vague responses that became increasingly defensive as Emily grew older and more persistent in seeking answers. "Your father left when you were very young," was Margaret's standard response. "Some men aren't cut out for family responsibility. It's better that you don't dwell on people who choose not to be part of your life." But Emily remembered fragments from her early childhood that didn't align with her mother's narrative. She remembered a father who had seemed loving and present during her earliest years, a man who read her bedtime stories, took her to the park on weekends, and called her "my little princess" with genuine affection. She remembered feeling safe and cherished when he was around. The man Emily remembered from age 3 and 4 didn't seem like someone who would abandon his family. But children's memories can be unreliable, and Margaret insisted that Emily was romanticizing a relationship that had actually been troubled and unstable. David was charming when he wanted to be, Margaret would say during rare moments when she acknowledged Emily's father by name. But charm doesn't make someone a good husband or father. He had problems, Emily, problems that made it impossible for him to be the kind of man his family needed. What kind of problems? Emily would ask. Mental illness? Addiction? Financial irresponsibility? But Margaret would shut down these conversations before Emily could get specific answers about why her father had disappeared or where he had gone. As Emily grew into adolescence and adulthood, she learned to stop asking questions that would upset her mother. But privately, she wondered if David Thompson was still alive, if he ever thought about the daughter he had left behind, and if there were reasons for his departure that her mother couldn't or wouldn't explain. Emily's childhood was shaped by the absence of extended family, as well as the missing father. Margaret claimed that both sides of the family had been difficult people who had caused problems in her marriage and were better left in the past. Emily grew up without grandparents, aunts, uncles, or cousins, just her and Margaret against the world. "We don't need anyone else," Margaret would insist whenever Emily expressed curiosity about relatives she had never met. "We have each other, and that's enough." But it wasn't enough for Emily, who yearned for the large family gatherings she saw in movies and heard about from friends. She fantasized about holiday dinners with multiple generations, birthday parties with dozens of relatives, and the kind of family support system that Margaret insisted was overrated and unrealistic. Margaret Thompson died of ovarian cancer in 2014, taking her secrets with her to the grave. Emily had tried, during her mother's final months, to convince Margaret to share information about her father and their family history. But even facing death, Margaret remained stubbornly silent about the past. Some things are better left buried, were among Margaret's last coherent words to Emily. I protected you from a lot of pain, sweetheart. Don't go looking for trouble that I spent 40 years keeping away from you. Emily had spent 10 years since her mother's death trying to find her father and any trace of extended family. But every lead had ended in dead ends and sealed records. What she didn't know was that her family had been searching for her too, following a trail of clues that would finally lead Frank Rodriguez to her door on Christmas night. After Margaret's death, Emily had hired private investigators, searched genealogy websites, and filed requests for birth records and marriage certificates. But the trail always went cold. As if David Thompson had vanished completely from official records around the time he disappeared from Emily's life. The private investigator Emily hired in 2015 had managed to find David Thompson's birth certificate and high school records, confirming that he had been born in San Antonio, Texas, and had moved to Chicago for college. But after 1984, the year Emily remembered him leaving, there were no employment records, no tax filings, no address changes, and no death certificate. It's like your father deliberately erased himself from the system, the investigator had told Emily. Either he changed his identity completely, moved to another country, or something happened to him that wasn't officially documented. Emily had spent thousands of dollars and countless hours trying to solve the mystery of her father's disappearance, but every avenue of investigation led to more questions rather than answers. Eventually, she had accepted that some mysteries were unsolvable and focused on building a life that didn't require understanding her family history. But Emily's career as a social worker, helping children navigate family crises and reunification processes, kept her constantly aware of how important family connections were for emotional well-being. She saw the damage that abandonment and family separation caused in the lives of her clients, and she understood that her own feelings of isolation and difficulty maintaining long-term relationships were probably connected to the unresolved issues from her childhood. Emily had been in therapy for years, working through the abandonment issues and attachment problems that stemmed from her father's disappearance and her mother's secrecy. But therapy could only help her process the emotions around her family history. It couldn't fill in the factual gaps about what had actually happened to David Thompson and why Margaret had been so determined to keep the truth hidden. By 2024, Emily had largely given up hope of ever learning the truth about her family. She had created a quiet life for herself in Chicago, focusing on her work with foster children, and accepting that she would probably spend the rest of her life without understanding where she came from or whether she had relatives who might want to know her. What Emily didn't realize was that in San Antonio, Texas, an extended family had been conducting their own desperate search for the missing branch of their family tree, following leads and hiring investigators in a 20-year quest to find David Thompson's daughter and bring her home. Frank Rodriguez had been carrying a secret for 40 years that would explain everything about Emily's father's disappearance. But the truth he was about to reveal would prove that love and loyalty sometimes require making impossible choices, and that protecting someone can look exactly like abandoning them. Frank Rodriguez was not actually a stranger to Emily's family. He was David Thompson's brother-in-law, married to David's sister Maria, and he had been part of Emily's extended family during the first 5 years of her life. But Margaret Thompson had cut all contact with David's family after his disappearance, and Emily had no memory of the relatives who had loved her as a toddler. The Rodriguez family had spent 40 years believing that Margaret had taken Emily and moved away to prevent David's family from maintaining contact with their granddaughter and niece. They had tried for decades to locate Margaret and Emily, hiring private investigators and following false leads across multiple states. "We never stopped looking for you," Frank told Emily as she reluctantly let him into her apartment that Christmas night. "Your grandmother Rosa cried every Christmas for 20 years. Wondering where her little granddaughter was, and whether you were safe and loved. Your Aunt Maria saved every birthday present she bought for you, hoping someday we would find you, and she could give you 40 years' worth of gifts." Frank pulled photographs from his manila envelope. Pictures of Emily as a toddler with grandparents she didn't remember, cousins she had played with, and family gatherings where she had been surrounded by people who adored her. The photographic evidence of a loving extended family directly contradicted everything Margaret had told Emily about being better off without her father's difficult relatives. "Emily, Your mother told you that your father abandoned you, but that's not what happened, Frank continued, his voice heavy with 40 years of frustration and grief. David didn't leave his family by choice. He was taken from you, and he died trying to get back to you. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. Her father was dead? When? How? And why had her mother never told her? Frank explained that in 1984, David Thompson had been working 2 jobs to support his young family. Days at a manufacturing plant and evenings at a security company. On December 15, 1984, David had been working a night shift at a warehouse when armed robbers broke in. David had confronted them to prevent them from stealing the payroll money that would have meant dozens of families wouldn't receive their Christmas bonuses. David Thompson had been shot during the confrontation and had died at the scene, but not before managing to trigger the silent alarm that brought police and prevented the robbery. He had died a hero, but he had died nonetheless, leaving behind a 5-year-old daughter who would grow up believing he had abandoned her. Why didn't my mother tell me? Emily asked through tears. Why did she let me think he left us? Frank's answer would reveal a truth even more devastating than David's death. Margaret Thompson hadn't lied about David's death to be cruel. She had lied to protect Emily from a truth that was even more painful than abandonment. But her protective deception had created 40 years of unnecessary pain for everyone who loved David Thompson and his daughter. The truth about Margaret's deception was complex and heartbreaking. David Thompson hadn't just been killed during the warehouse robbery. He had been killed because he had recognized one of the robbers as someone connected to organized crime figures who had been pressuring local businesses for protection money. David's death hadn't been a random crime. It had been a targeted killing designed to send a message to other potential witnesses about what happened to people who interfered with criminal operations. The police investigation had revealed connections between the warehouse robbery and a larger criminal organization that was known for retaliating against families of people who opposed them. The police told Margaret that testifying against the people who killed David could put you and her in danger, Frank explained. They recommended that she move away. Change her name if necessary, and avoid any contact with David's family or friends who might accidentally reveal her location to people looking for revenge. Margaret had been a 26-year-old widow with a 5-year-old daughter. Terrified of organized crime figures who had already proven they would kill anyone who stood in their way. The police couldn't guarantee her family's safety if she stayed in San Antonio or maintained contact with people who had known David. So Margaret had made the agonizing decision to disappear completely, taking Emily to Chicago and creating new identities for both of them. She had told Emily that David abandoned them because the truth, that he died heroically, but that his death had put them in mortal danger, was too complicated and terrifying for a 5-year-old to understand. She thought she was protecting you, Frank said gently, and maybe she was... But she also cut you off from a family who loved you desperately and spent 40 years wondering if you were alive. Margaret had maintained the lie throughout Emily's childhood and adulthood because admitting the truth would have required explaining why she had hidden it for so long, and because she had built their entire life in Chicago on the foundation of their false identity. By the time Emily was old enough to handle the truth, Margaret was too invested in the deception to reveal it. But the criminal organization that had threatened Margaret's family in 1984 had been dismantled by federal investigations in the 1990s. The danger that had forced Margaret to hide had been eliminated decades ago, but Margaret had never known that it was safe to reconnect with David's family or tell Emily the truth about her father's heroic death. We could have been together all these years, Frank said sadly. Your grandmother Rosa died 5 years ago, still wondering where you were. Your Aunt Maria has been saving Christmas presents for you for 40 years. We have cousins who remember playing with you when you were little, and we have family stories and photographs that could fill in all the gaps in your childhood memories. Emily was overwhelmed by the realization that she had spent 40 years alone, not because she had no family, but because her mother's protective instincts had kept her separated from relatives who had never stopped loving her and searching for her. Emily's discovery that she had a large, loving family who had been searching for her would be overshadowed by an even more stunning revelation. Her father had left behind a legacy that would change her understanding of who he was and what his death had meant to the community he died protecting. Frank's manila envelope contained more than just family photographs and explanations about David's death. It also contained newspaper clippings, community awards, and documentation of the legacy that David Thompson had left behind in San Antonio. After David's death, the warehouse employees whose Christmas bonuses he had died protecting had established the David Thompson Memorial Fund, a scholarship program for children of working-class families in San Antonio. Over 40 years, the fund had provided college educations for hundreds of students who couldn't otherwise afford higher education. Your father saved those Christmas bonuses for 43 families, Frank explained. But his legacy ended up providing opportunities for hundreds of young people who went on to become doctors, teachers, engineers, and community leaders. There's a whole generation of successful adults in San Antonio who owe their educations to your father's courage. Emily learned that every year on December 15th, the anniversary of David's death, the scholarship recipients gathered for a memorial service where they shared stories about how David Thompson's sacrifice had changed their lives. Many of the scholarship recipients had named their own children David or Emily in honor of the hero who had made their success possible. There's a David Thompson Community Center in the neighborhood where your father grew up, Frank continued, and there's a memorial garden with a plaque that lists all the scholarship recipients. Your name should have been on that plaque years ago, as David's daughter and his most important legacy. But the most stunning revelation was yet to come. The David Thompson Memorial Fund had grown over 40 years into an endowment worth over $2 million, generating annual scholarships for deserving students. As David's sole heir, Emily was legally entitled to oversee the fund and make decisions about its future direction. Your father didn't just leave behind a family who loved him, Frank explained. He left behind a community that has been honoring his memory for 40 years, and a scholarship fund that has been waiting for his daughter to come home and take her rightful place as its steward. Emily would inherit not just a family and an understanding of her father's heroic death, but also the responsibility of continuing his legacy of helping working-class families achieve their educational dreams. Emily's Christmas night was about to become a Christmas miracle that would reunite her with a family she thought she'd lost forever. But the reunion would also force her to decide whether to stay in the safe life she had built in Chicago or return to San Antonio to claim the legacy her father had left behind. Frank Rodriguez hadn't come to Emily's apartment alone on Christmas night. Outside in the hallway, he had been accompanied by Maria Rodriguez, David's sister and Emily's aunt, who had been too nervous to knock on the door herself after 40 years of wondering whether her niece would want to see her. Maria has been carrying around a Christmas present for you since 1985, Frank said with a gentle smile. She buys you something every year and puts it under her tree, hoping this will be the Christmas when you come home. When Maria finally entered Emily's apartment, the resemblance between aunt and niece was unmistakable. They had the same eyes, the same smile, and the same mannerisms that made it clear they were family. Maria immediately burst into tears at seeing Emily for the first time since she was 5 years old. "Mija, you look just like your father," Maria said through her tears, using the Spanish endearment that triggered a distant memory in Emily's mind. "I have been praying every day for 40 years that God would bring you back to us." Maria had brought not just a 2024 Christmas present she had bought for Emily, but also a scrapbook containing 40 years of documentation about their family's life. Photos of cousins getting married, grandchildren being born, family celebrations where Emily's absence had been keenly felt, and newspaper clippings about the scholarship fund that honored her father's memory. "We never forgot you," Maria explained. "Every family gathering, every Christmas dinner, every birthday party, we always set a place for you and said a prayer that somehow you would find your way home to us." But the most emotional moment came when Maria showed Emily a bedroom in her San Antonio home that had been maintained for 40 years as Emily's room, decorated with toys and books appropriate for different ages as Maria had imagined Emily growing up, filled with clothes and sizes Maria had guessed Emily might wear, and walls covered with school photos of cousins Emily had never known she had. "I know this might seem crazy," Maria said, "but I never stopped believing that you would come home someday. This room has been waiting for you since 1984. Frank and Maria had driven from San Antonio to Chicago not just to deliver information about Emily's family, but to invite her to spend New Year's Eve with relatives who had been planning a reunion for decades. The entire extended family, Dozens of cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends were gathering in San Antonio to welcome Emily home. "You don't have to decide tonight," Frank said gently. "But we want you to know that you have a family who has been incomplete without you, and a community that has been waiting 40 years to thank David Thompson's daughter for the sacrifice that made their success possible." Emily would have to choose between the solitary life she had built in Chicago and the overwhelming love of a family she had forgotten, but who had never forgotten her. Emily made her decision at 2:30 a.m. on December 26th, after spending 5 hours talking with Frank and Maria Rodriguez about 40 years of family history, looking at photographs of relatives she couldn't remember, and processing the revelation that everything she had believed about her identity had been wrong. "I want to meet my family," Emily said finally. "I want to see the Memorial Fund and the community center. I want to understand the legacy my father left behind. And I want to spend New Year's Eve with people who have been missing me as much as I've been missing them without knowing it." 3 days later, Emily Rodriguez, she had reclaimed her father's original surname, was standing in the San Antonio airport, nervous about meeting relatives she hadn't seen since she was 5 years old and cousins she had never known existed. But the moment she walked out of the gate, there was no question about which group was her family. Dozens of people holding signs that said, "Welcome home, Emily," and "Thompson Family Reunion," surrounded her with hugs, tears, and a kind of overwhelming love she had never experienced. "Prima," her cousins called out, using the Spanish word for cousin that triggered more childhood memories. "We've been waiting so long to meet you." Emily learned that her extended family included teachers, nurses, small business owners, and community leaders, many of whom had been recipients of David Thompson Memorial Fund scholarships themselves. Her father's heroic death had not only saved Christmas bonuses for warehouse workers, but had created a cycle of educational opportunity that had lifted dozens of families out of poverty over 4 decades. The New Year's Eve celebration was held at the David Thompson Community Center, where Emily saw her father's name engraved on a plaque honoring local heroes. She met scholarship recipients who told her stories about how her father's death had made their educations possible, and she saw photographs of hundreds of young people whose lives had been changed by the fund established in his memory. But the most emotional moment came when Emily visited the memorial garden and saw her name already engraved on a plaque as Emily Thompson Rodriguez, beloved daughter of our hero David Thompson. Her family had never given up hope that she would return to claim her place in her father's legacy. "We always knew you would come home," Maria said as Emily knelt beside her father's memorial stone. "David was the kind of man who protected everyone he loved, even when it cost him everything. We knew he was protecting you wherever you were, and we knew you would find your way back to us when it was safe." 6 months later, Emily moved permanently to San Antonio to take over administration of the David Thompson Memorial Fund. She sold her Chicago apartment and relocated to her hometown, where she could be surrounded by a family who had never stopped loving her and continue her father's work of helping working-class families achieve their educational dreams. The scholarship fund had grown to over $3 million under Emily's leadership, and she had expanded its mission to include support for children who had been separated from their families by circumstances beyond their control, just as she had been separated from her father's family by her mother's protective deception. Emily's work as a social worker in Chicago had prepared her perfectly for her new role as a community leader in San Antonio. She understood the importance of family connections, the damage caused by separation and secrecy, and the healing power of reunion and truth-telling. Every December 15th, Emily now leads a memorial service for her father, sharing her story of 40 years of separation and the Christmas miracle that brought her home. Her testimony has become legendary in San Antonio, inspiring other families to search for missing relatives and encouraging parents to tell their children the truth about their family histories, even when the truth is complicated and painful. The David Thompson Memorial Fund now provides scholarships specifically for children who have been reunited with families after long separations, honoring both David's heroic legacy and Emily's journey from isolation to belonging. Emily Rodriguez learned that Christmas miracles sometimes come in the form of unexpected visitors who knock on your door with truths you thought you'd never learn, and that the greatest gifts are often the families we thought we had lost forever, but who never stopped searching for us. Frank Rodriguez's Christmas visit hadn't just solved the mystery of Emily's family history. It had restored her to a legacy of love, heroism, and community service that had been waiting 40 years for David Thompson's daughter to come home and claim her rightful place in the story her father had begun with his sacrifice. Sometimes the best Christmas presents come wrapped in manila envelopes carried by strangers who turn out to be family.